Hello Baldur's Gate 3 fans. The final patch 8 just dropped today, and besides the many awesome new features, one question might be the most pressing. Which subclasses are worth playing? Which one does the most damage, and which hit harder or less than the already available subclass options? There's already a few good videos about this topic, but it's hard to make up claims only by reading the wiki, or testing it in one in-game situation, or by mere gut feeling. So, for the old classes, I already conducted a systematic benchmark that simulates all of them in a standardized environment and returns precise damage calculations over 10 rounds. This is how it works. Given an in-game build for all actions and spells, the expected damage values are calculated given the dice ranges, hit rate, and so on. You can then click together a skill rotation of your liking or use straightforward AI that approximates the best strategy. In the end, it visualizes the damage of each skill stacked on top of each other per round, and it includes all buffs and status effects, debuffs on the opponent, triggered damage riders, and so on. This Oath of the Crown Paladin, for example, gets the most damage if casting Spirit Guardians and Weapon in the first round, and using his smites afterwards, with a slashing and a radiant damage part, which all trigger Great Weapon Master, improved Divine Strike, and even dipped in fire per hit. I'll put the link to the full system introduction in the video description if you want to know how it works, but now without further ado, going for the new subclasses, who is the biggest loser? If you look at this compares the up to now best damage subclass with the new subclass for a class. And to be fair, it looks pretty devastating for some classes. Let me give you a quick rundown what would change damage-wise per class when you go for the new subclass, and wrap up the highest damage subclasses of all over 1 or 10 rounds in the end. Ranger gets Swarmkeeper, which is some bees, jelly or moths instead of the Beast Master's mighty beasts. If you look at these bars, the damage of them is tiny and the only benefit is a bit of mobility. Doesn't sound too strong. In contrast, this is the amount a Beast Master's companion can do, which is worlds apart. The loss of Drunken Master is also not surprising, since Open Hand Monk had 3 damage riders on every of his many strikes and even the wholeness of body buff that let him go rampage. The only gimmick is a growing armor class and accuracy and the thrill of being drunk. At level 9, making others drunk can be a bit beneficial due to the bonus psychic damage of Sobering Resolution, but that's it. Paladin lost a chunk of damage since Oath of Vengeance is already very offensive. To be honest, the largest part here is the loss of self-haste. If you ignore that you had the haste buff, you go ±0 thanks to Spirit Guardians and Weapon, and could boost the companion's attack rolls, so a well-rounded alternative after all. In contrast to the very strong shape-shifting Circle of the Moon druid, Circle of Stars scores a 25% damage less, since you can't make as much out of cold vulnerability. However, you don't have to be permanently shaped, you have a lot of flexibility and a huge boost to concentration in the Starry Dragon form. This helps keeping up your upcasted Moonbeam, which is great because it can be recasted, hits both on your turn and the opponent's turn, saves spell slots, and can even hit multiple targets. The Shadow Sorcerer, while looking nice, has a hard time to compete with Storm, since the latter can generate vulnerability through Wet. Almost every perk revolves around the Homebrew Dog, which can tank a lot of hits, duplicate, and get your sorcery points back, so it's a nice gimmick to have, and being able to hide in shadows makes it quite tanky as well. Glamour looks very bleak on paper, but it's still a bard, so the damage output is not too bad even without Sword College's flourishes and the extra attack. For a cold caster with now even more options for crowd control and damage mitigation, it is actually fine. Swashbuckler Rogue is kind of a missed opportunity, as, just as the Thief, it will be also only used as a subclass instead of maining it. The best part of it is the free disarm every turn, but the damage output is as lackluster as the vanilla Thief, just with one bonus action less. Death Cleric is very borderline, and I would say quite balanced actually. Tempest Domain can create its own vulnerability, but Touch of Death can make a bit up for that. The new cantrips are also nice, especially early game or if you have multiple targets. Wizard is the first who actually benefits from its new subclass. You don't lose anything from evocation except for empowered evocations, which is very nice for multi-hits like Scorching Ray, but not that mighty in cold setups, which are stronger under these circumstances, as your water elemental can generate you cold vulnerability. As long as you have high spell slots, there is no real difference, but Bladesinging's extra attack Booming Blades pull ahead when only cantrips are available. Okay, Booming Blade is especially strong if the enemy moves, which is assumed here, but even if not, the Bladesinger does 1% more, so it's actually nicely balanced. The damage from the buff Blade Song is actually not super important. You are well off if you keep it up for the AC and concentration bonus, if it's not the end of the battle anyway. Giant Barbarian is bigger than I initially expected, especially as with how well throwing works in this game. It does not have the negative drawbacks of Berserker's frenzied strain over time, so he can kick and throw his way to victory, while Elemental Cleaver and auto-returning weapons add some benefits. While Berserker's burst is higher, Giant will eventually break even over time. Fighter, the runner-up winner, was a strong multi-hitter before and can now add a series of fantastic shot options to its arrows. Especially if you have the range advantage, Grasping Arrow can trigger a lot more often, so these numbers could look even higher, and if not, Shadow Arrow can generate your self-advantage easily. Our biggest winner though is undoubtedly the Hexblade. While Blade Lock before was already nice, especially in times where you could multiclass into triple attack, Hexblade has a series of advantages. Having extra attack and packed weapon for free, you can go Pact of the Tome and generate self-haste once per long rest and a free skeleton, and complement that with a quite potent Spectre companion, depending on the size of your last target. Also, among all the non-multiclassed builds up to now, Hexblade benefits the most from Booming Blade, and the Hexblade's curse only improves your attacks. Even without haste and Booming Blade, the Hexblade still outperforms the conventional Blade Lock by 100% with the biggest Spectre, so this is a clear winner for this patch, and it's incredibly potent in multiclassing, for example with 11 levels of Eldritch Knight. So much for relative win or loss within classes. Looking at absolute numbers between classes, the cold vulnerability abusing Bladesinger Wizard is still slightly leading, with about the same potential as the Hexblade. Most classes who lost some damage potential were okay with that, as they already performed reasonably well, but Drunken Master, Swashbuckler and Swarmkeeper feel a bit weak to compete. Now, a lot of comments in the last video mentioned that we don't really need to compare 10 rounds, as damage-wise often combat can be decided in a single turn, especially in the lower difficulties. So here are all the 12 new subclasses side by side in how they can pump out the most damage in a single turn. Most concentration spells are not worth it in this situation, including haste, so this is what some would call Nova damage. Here, Fighter's Arcane Archer excels, as the 3 main hand attacks doubled by Action Surge and improved by a quiver of arcane arrows leads to the strongest possible solo burst, even if it falls back afterwards. The next strongest candidates are mostly spellcasters, as they can unleash their highest spell slots and sometimes even get some vulnerability, and the just discussed Booming Hexblade with friends. Long story short, these are the biggest winners and losers compared to the existing subclasses. These are the currently hardest hitting new ones over 10 rounds, and here in a single turn. Thanks for listening. You can inspect the interactive simulation graphs through the links in the description. Let me know what you would love to see simulated as well, as the journey does not stop at single classing or dummy opponents or standardized equipment or solo player damage without party support, of course.